over the past 2 years, as the pandemic's effects on health, travel, and the economy expanded, supply chain vulnerabilities have established themselves regularly in the headlines. Practically every industry has been impacted, from a lack of used car parts to labor shortages. In an attempt to streamline systems and connect globally, a massive push to digitize is already making its path. But this also prompts a variety of new security issues. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Analytics Insight podcast, where we talk about the ever evolving tech space. And I'm your host, Priya Dialani. Supply chain logistics extend beyond the worries that Christmas presents might be late or unavailable, or that a company might suffer customer complaints. When it comes to supply chain risk, the reality is physical. Items of all kinds are being moved around the world, and many have specific vulnerabilities. Now, while our reliance on technological systems to manage all aspects of the supply chain grow, so do the pain points and vulnerabilities. Let's welcome Mihirrr Thaker, CISO and DPO at Allcargo Group, to discuss why cybersecurity is emerging as the next big boon for global logistics. Hi Mihir, how are you doing?
Hi, Priya. Very well. Thank you. And a big hello to all your listeners as well.
Thank you so much, Mihir. A warm welcome to our podcast today.
Thank
And
you.
I think lately, when we talk about digitization, cybersecurity is something that goes hand in hand with our discussion. And of course, we are going to unlock more such insights from you today. So let's get started by telling our listeners more about All Cargo Group, its specialization, and alongside that, we would also like to know more about you, Mihir. How has your journey been till date, and what is your role at the company today?
Sure. And that's a good point to start with because today there was a time when we used to say technology is the key enabler for any business. And without technology, business could not exist, be it any form of business that is there. Now we can rightly say so that cybersecurity is that enabler in the technology, the digitization aspects that you are referring to. So, with that as the context, at All Cargo Group, we are a global logistics player, a supply chain solution provider. Our services extend across the multimodal approach where we deliver cargo goods for our customers through air, surface, and water. And we have services which are very integrated to the supply chain model where we operate container freight stations, we operate warehouses, and we also build infrastructure which is relevant to global and local supply chain systems. And as a CISO and DPO for All Cargo Group, I look after the organization's digital information assets in terms of our global operations. We drive the cyber security, cyber defense strategies. We look at the various compliances that we have to look forward, we have to take care of. And then obviously we have our setup, which helps us in monitoring our day to day operations. As a security, cybersecurity, information security practitioner myself, I've been in the professional work experience for more than 25 years now. Of those 25, last 20 years have been focused on taking care of information security, business continuity, risk management, data privacy. Those aspects I have been delivering as a professional. On the educational background, I have computer science as the base. Over and above that, I have professional certifications like the CISA, which is Certified Information Systems Auditor, a premier certification from ISACA. ISACA is Information Systems Control Authority, which is a global entity. And I also hold the Cybersecurity Nexus professional certification. And in my Education 2.0, I am also currently pursuing my PhD and my research subject is cybersecurity education. That's an overall thing that I can talk about myself.
Thank you, Mihir, for that great overview. And I think it really helps set the context for everything we are going to unpack in today's conversation. And we are really glad to know about Allcargo Group as well as about your leadership, which sits right at the intersection of strategy and execution. And I think which is where a lot of real transformation actually happens. Now that we have a clear understanding of the foundation, we are building on, let's take a step further into the broader landscape. From time and temperature sensitive items all the way to the logistics of port deliveries, danger abounds and extends far beyond financial damage. For example, consider a scenario where a cyber criminal gains control of an oil supertanker by accessing the autopilot steering systems. The possibilities in such a situation, from running it into another vessel, redirecting it, or simply trying to destroy it by running it aground, could also mean a huge environmental disaster. So, what are some unique cyber risks and challenges that we are facing today in the logistics and global trade?
Yeah, good question. And I really appreciate the way you kind of built the scenario. So, for a logistics ecosystem, just as a point of clarity for all, the ship example that you gave is just one component of the various subsystems that have an interplay when a good is getting delivered from point A to point B. For us, as a business entity where we don't own a ship, we have arrangements with our partner ecosystem. We play the role of that party which has interaction with customer and the larger logistics supply chain partners with whom we connect and make sure that the goods are appropriately processed. Now, as an interconnected system, because of the advancements in the technology, now interfaces are available where we have real time interconnects with our partners. We ourselves run our transaction management system, we have our financial management systems. So, as a broad interplay between these, the key cyber risks that exist are in terms of the unauthorized access or system outage caused by a malicious code, or very broadly speaking, a system not being available to transact business. Now, these are nothing but the three aspects of confidentiality, integrity, availability of systems. Now, with the current times, the geopolitical scenarios that exist, also the focus by threat actors on critical infrastructure components, it is very, very real that there are attacks getting materialized on a real time basis. And on those real time basis, you need to have appropriate cyber defense strategies in place which can help you not only identify and detect but also respond and recover from a particular attack or a risk. And going back to the previous point of confidentiality, integrity, availability, I mean, every risk that one encounters will have impact and a probability. Now, the approach is to make sure that we have controls adequate, appropriate, to mitigate the risks, and to make sure that there are minimal residual risks at the end of. And as a current scenario, because of the proliferation of internet, gone are those days where interconnected systems meant endpoints, that is computers, laptops, connecting to business applications in a data center. Now the application exists on a mobile phone in terms of the form factor that I'm saying. And the application that is being accessed could be a cloud based application. So with the proliferation of digital, the internet, the focus on controls, as I said, on real time, and tying it up with identification of the appropriate assets, just to make sure that we know what we have to protect in terms of external view, the internal view, and third is from the market place, the place where you operate. And internet is a huge enabler where it makes the whole world one single marketplace, and then there are threat actors who lurk to try and get advantage. If your walls are not strong enough, there could be somebody taking advantage out of it. So that's a very broad based explanation to your question.
Yeah, but I think that's a very fascinating perspective, Mihir, and it really highlights how cybersecurity in logistics goes far beyond traditional IT risks. And it's very crucial to understand how deeply interconnected global trade ecosystems have become, where even a single vulnerability in one node can ripple across the entire supply chain. And I think we are not just talking about protecting data when it comes to cybersecurity. We are talking about safeguarding the movement of goods, national economies, and even critical infrastructure. So, the conversion of IT and operational technology in logistics has significantly expanded the attack surface. And I think that's where, we need a more collaborative and intelligence driven approach to cybersecurity rather than an isolated function just within the individual organizations.
Absolutely. I mean, you touched on a very important point that because of the nature of business, no one person or no one department can take care of one particular task. It is always a set of collaboration, cooperation that is required. Now, taking the cue from the earlier point which I was making, that for us also as a logistics partner, there is a complex ecosystem of various third parties that you interconnect, rely upon. Now, from a typical explanation, supply chain, one would look at the input and the output for a particular product. Here we are talking about a service which is involving movement of physical goods, as I was mentioning earlier as well. Now, in this, the supply chain is not just the partners who help movement of the goods. Supply chain also involves various components, be it in form of technology components. I try to not use a lot of technical jargons, hence I'm avoiding certain terms of reference. But yeah, for those of our listeners who are technically focused, for them API, the application programming interfaces, or the EDIs that we have to interconnect with our partners, those things require a very detailed view. Again, it goes back to the point which is to do with once you identify what are your critical assets, like when we are dealing with connected systems, any device that carries a IP, different way of looking at the OT point that you were referring to. In logistics, there may not be operational technology like in any other manufacturing or any other industry, but for sure there would be connected systems, things that help tracking of the shipments, things that help proper sorting and prioritization of the cargo which is being handled. Now, all of these are connected systems. And for the connected system, which has a IP address, aspects of protection from the context of confidentiality, integrity, and availability does apply. And going to the point of once you have appropriately identified, then you would have appropriate control measures implemented for it. And once those controls are implemented, you make sure there is periodic compliance checks to identify that controls which are implemented are delivering the objectives for which those controls have been implemented, followed by appropriate response. Once if you detect a particular incident or an alert which requires further actions, then appropriate response. And if it happens to be a incident at scale, then you have appropriate recovery mechanisms in place. So it's a very structured approach that one needs to follow, have appropriate information systems and appropriate information security management system implementation in place. And now with the way we saw the internet as a boom, cloud as a boom, the previous version for AI, which was more from the machine learning and data science point of view, and now which we all use as AI, artificial intelligence. All these things have already been there. It's just that in terms of its scale and its ability to solve real life problem, they are being used more. And for those, once it becomes utilization at a scale, then there are threat actors who are trying to exploit a vulnerability and make a, because their living is in getting the systems impacted and down. So yeah, it's a complex setup, but we take care of whatever I'm talking about are more from the ISMS, information systems, information security management system deployments that we do.
Right, definitely, Mihir. And the digital backbone of global logistics has become both its greatest strength and also its biggest risk because cyber incidents are no longer isolated technical events. They disrupt operations, bubble up to board level priorities and trigger regulatory scrutiny as well. And as a result, leaders are prioritizing cyber resilience initiatives that measure security effectiveness by real risk reduction and business impact. Still, just 19% of organizations say their cyber resilience capabilities exceed minimum requirements. Now, amid a rapidly evolving threat landscape driven by emerging technologies, accelerating third party and supply chain vulnerabilities, ongoing skill shortages, organizations need a clearer path to building resilience at the architectural level. So, what does cyber resilience mean in the context of global supply chains, and how can organizations build it into their core strategy?
Yeah, great question. I mean, resilience as the background, and then for a connected system, the cyber resilience. Because incidents today, which could be because of internet connected systems, can cause catastrophic level outages, which could mean threat to the business itself. Now, from a board context, it is very, very important that incident response as a, not just as a SOP, but something that is practiced in routine day to day is implemented. And for the incident response, the key inputs come from setup where appropriate risk assessments, vulnerability assessments are performed on a periodic basis, which provide a input on I'm just taking this as an analogy with the human system. I mean, the way our cells are built, we have certain internal parameters which help us build on the immunity. Immunity, I mean, why it is important is we cannot control the external factors. Those are driven by many other contributing factors. So, what can be controlled is these internal parameters. Now, from an organizational context, what is the business? What are the key assets, information assets that one is dealing with? Appropriate risk assessment of that, both in terms of environment. I'm referring to not only from the larger sustainability point of view, but also from the business environment point of view. Like the current geopolitical scenarios that we are all undergoing, experiencing large scale outages because of impact to a supply chain route can cause. And with that, I'm just connecting this to the risk assessment aspect that I was referring to. So once the risks are appropriately identified, to quantify those risks in terms of the monetary value impact to the business. You in your previous one of the points you did mention around, it's not just financial, reputational damages, regulatory damages that could cause impact. Now, for that, proper risk assessment, risk treatment, and then once you have those in place, the governance mechanism which takes care of performing not just point in time checks but real time checks, those that can help you things happening in a real time. Because we are, in an age and era where being reactive is not good enough. One needs to be proactive, and that's where the vulnerability assessments, penetration tests activity play a big role in terms of identifying how your systems are vulnerable. And going back to the human anatomy example, I mean, if your immunity is strong, if your internals vitals are strong, then you have the capability to deal with any other external factor. So similarly, from an organization context, you look at your improvement of your internal vitals, and that's through focus on reducing exposure. So output of a vulnerability assessment exercise helps understand which are the assets that are most prone to a particular risk, and then have appropriate risk assessment plans in place. And those which require a particular treatment plan, there would be appropriate costs. And then the cost benefit analysis of it in terms of what is the perceived value of an impact that a particular risk could, if materialized, could have to the organization. A very clear communication on this. So actually, I have interconnected a couple of points. I focused about exposure. So one of the key parameter to discuss is how are we reducing the exposure. The second key parameter on this same context is how are you improving your posture. So from a view, I'm saying something which is internal focused such that it impacts the external. That's the posture. So once you have taken care of your exposure, you also take care of your posture. How strong are your walls such that it cannot be broken or penetrated. So that's where the focus around activities which help test your systems capacity to handle withstand attack. And the whole of it, when worked out in a structured manner, is resilience. Now resilience is not just what did I do or how did I respond one incident or one alert. It has to be more like a muscle memory, and that can only get built by having appropriate tabletop exercises, drills. I'm not trying to, I'm avoiding the term ITDR, because generally ITDR gets perceived as silver bullet for any availability requirements, but that's not just it. There are also operational recovery strategies which needs to be periodically tested, be it across the industry. So
Right.
that's a complete
Right.
response. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think cyber resilience is no longer just an IT priority, but a business critical capability. And, I think that's where, the shift comes from, where organizations are moving from a reactive mindset to focus on being very preventive in terms of mitigating the attacks. And because, resilience, it's not just about protecting themselves, it's about positioning the entire organization to be more agile, trustworthy, and ultimately more competitive in an increasingly volatile digital landscape. So, of course, when we talk about the digital landscape, we have, like you mentioned that attackers are also leveraging sophisticated AI technologies, and unfortunately, traditional rule-based defenses can't keep up with the speed and sophistication of today's attacks, like the zero-day exploits, ransomware, AI-powered phishing, and IoT compromises. So, it's important how we protect our sensitive data and digital assets. So, as organizations seek innovative solutions to fortify their defenses, AI-driven threat detection and blockchain technology have emerged as a game changer in the realm of cybersecurity. So, how effective, are these AI-driven threat detection systems today, and what role do you see blockchain playing in the future in strengthening cybersecurity?
So, two parts to your question. One, in terms of AI in its current state and form, is actually it has evolved a lot. And to the context, we cannot say that we are not using AI. The reason is in ways and means that we are not comprehending. AI has started touching our day to day lives. That is more from a personal context. From a cybersecurity perspective, today, with its pedigree on machine learning, the data science capabilities, I mean, and then add up with the intelligence in terms of the GPT approach that we would say. Today, AI is a friend in terms of identifying the anomalies, because the attackers, as you rightly said, are leveraging these technologies. So you cannot have man respond to a machine attack. You really need a machine versus machine. Now in this, it's not from a negative connotation, but more from a empowerment point of view, that some of these technologies around threat and anomaly detection, or from our capability to respond, also AI can be a great enabler, and for which the approach is not just have security look at it as a gate, like a toll gate through which one needs to pass, but rather security becomes the part of the day to day action, such that it is the guardrail. So it's not a smart play of words, but it's not just AI security, but it is also the security of AI that one needs to focus on. And that is possible through, again, going back to the basics around having appropriate policy procedures, controls, the compliance, and then you make sure that you periodically test these, and appropriately do your compliance audits, and those then become inputs for your next strategy improvement. So the terminology which we in our domain use it as the plan, do, check, and act, PDCA cycle. So that's a continuum. You make sure that there is always continuous focus on it. And no doubt, I mean, as I said earlier, that AI is an enabler to help both while the attackers are using it for the offense. For a defender, AI becomes a critical piece of the puzzle which one needs to master.
Definitely, Mihir, and I think it's so much is going around, in terms of how the logistics and the global trade is evolving, and how collaborative we need to be, not just within organizations, but across governments, technology providers, and logistic partners. And that's where, role of emerging technologies like AI and blockchain are kind of helping us rethink our operating models and invest in cyber resilience, and building systems that are both agile and secure by design. Well, thank you so much, Mihir, for taking out the time and effort to be on our podcast today, and giving us a broader view of the entire global trade, and how does the future of secure and resilient global trade should look like, and how organizations should prepare by it. I think by combining advanced technology with informed people and structured processes, logistic companies can safeguard their networks, ensure the uninterrupted flow of global trade, and stay ahead of emerging cyber threats. Thank you so much for your insights, Mihir. It was lovely chatting with you.
Amazing. And the credit should also go to you in terms of asking questions that help me, put up points which helps, of course, our listeners. And I mean, the most recent development, the way the technology is moving on the cybersecurity front, I mean, what identification of vulnerabilities would take, years is now happening in a matter of weeks. So what happens is that there are technologies which are growing at a scale in terms of the business requirements, but while the developments are happening, there are intrinsic issues which are getting embedded. And as a defense guy, cyber defender, it is so important that you scale up. And the way the industry consortium, so it's a combination of like threat actors have their group. It is important that defenders also get together and support each other. And I'm sure your podcast does help in building up on the common knowledge of it. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Mihir, for those kind words. So, this is for our listeners. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion around the role of cybersecurity in logistics, supply chain, and global trade. And in a world where cybersecurity in logistics is more crucial than ever, proactive security measures and intelligent solutions are key to protecting both operations in the global trade. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes, and you can view all our previous episodes on Spotify and other leading platforms. Thank you so much.